Hi, it's B. I didn't think I'd be sharing another video with you quite so soon, but with the news about the army going into school, I thought it might be a good idea to talk through notices of conditional acceptance, what they are and how they can be used. It's really along the lines of give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So this is about you developing your own strategy for dealing with the pandemic. But first of all, I'd like to begin by thanking everyone so much for your messages of appreciation for the work that I'm trying to do, in particular for the wonderful messages about the Get Out of Lockdown video. And also thank you to those of you who have emailed me requesting additional information. I want to begin with a caveat though, and that is that I'm not a lawyer, I'm not legally trained, nor am I trained in common law. I'm just someone who spent the last 7 months or so following the corona pantomime and studying common law as a way to support first of all myself and then others during this pandemic. Delighted my videos are hitting the mark. To those of you who are emailing me for information on family matters, birth certificates, trusts, etc., I have to say that I really haven't studied those areas in depth, so I can't really give appropriate advice on those matters, although should I get the opportunity, I will look into those areas. But for now, I'm focusing on helping people deal with the immediate pandemic situation. There are other sites who might be able to help you better, and those that I've personally found useful are in the resources page at the end of this video. In fact, they're in the resources page at the end of all my videos. This is my fourth. I do strongly, and I can't say this enough, I do strongly recommend people do their own research, if only because from birth we've been taught to be reliant on others to rescue us, when the reality is that we are born sovereign with the ability to think critically and to stand in our own power. My videos are, to my mind at least, simply signposts. It's in your gift to follow through with additional research and personal decision making. So what is a notice of conditional acceptance? Well, it's a letter in the form of a notice made to a claimant, that's someone who's making a claim against you. It could be for payment of a debt or a fine or a bill, such as income tax or council tax. Now, please don't run away with the idea that I'm endorsing non-payment of bills. We need to remember that under common law, we must follow through with doing no harm or causing any loss or injury. So it's really up to you how you choose to use these notices of conditional acceptance while standing under common law. The notice of conditional acceptance can also be used as strategies for declining invitations to government mandates, such as mask wearing or social gathering, by putting the claimant, in this case the government, under notice that in order for you to pursue the matter further, you need additional information, such as evidence or acceptance of liability for any harm, loss or injury caused to you by accepting the invitation to the mandate. Its advantage is that rather than point blank refusing the claim, you're stating your intent to accept it on the provision that certain conditions are met. This leaves you in honour under common law and puts the onus on the claimant to evidence their claim. So at this point, I just want to recap on the law of the land, the law of the sea, and the strawman fiction for those of you who are new to common law or who haven't yet checked out my first video. So the law of the land is the living and true, the original law of the men and women of the land. It's underpinned by the Magna Carta and ratified by what's known as the unwritten British Constitution. Some people would contest that, but to the best of my knowledge at this moment, the British Constitution does exist, but it doesn't exist in one document. Rather, it exists in several different documents. But as I say, I believe it does exist. The law of the land, or common law, has one tenet, which is do no harm, which means to cause no loss, no harm or no injury to another living or sentient being. A more positive way of looking at this is to stand in your power, to speak your truth and to behave with integrity at all times. Under common law, a man's word is his bond, and business can be undertaken just with a handshake or in the presence of two witnesses. Common law really is very simple, although sadly nowadays, to my way of thinking, I see some groups trying to make it more complicated than I feel it was ever meant to be. So now let's turn to the law of the sea, or Admiralty law. Admiralty law is a fraudulent fiction used by the corporation government to defraud and rob the living men and women of the soil. It's complicated, it's intimidating, and above all, for the powers that be, it's revenue generating. It can be split into three different sections: criminal law, civil law, and commercial law. The law of the sea, Admiralty law, always requires your signature, and there's a nefarious reason for this. Now, I asserted earlier that the law of the sea is a fraudulent fiction. Why did I say that? Well, it's because Admiralty law, the law of the sea, only applies to cargo on the ocean. It doesn't apply to the living men and women of the land, to whom common law applies. So the powers that be need to trick the men and women of the soil into standing under Admiralty law. And they do this by using a soulless paper fiction known as a straw man. When your parents or guardians register your birth, a copy of your birth certificate is made in black ink and in capital letters. This, together with your unique identification number, in the UK this is a national insurance number, is then metaphorically captured and taken out to sea, where it is birthed. This dead paper entity is known as a straw man, and it is this that the corporation government uses to trick you, the living man of the soil, into standing under Admiralty law by encouraging you to represent your straw man. The delusion begins with the early years propaganda program, which teaches us to be obedient citizens and to trust the corporation government, and continues using media reinforcement and intimidation as we grow and gain adulthood. The deceit is to get you to believe that you are your straw man, but you're not. This is because the straw man is a dead entity, and therefore it can't go to court, it can't pay fines, it cannot be imprisoned, but you can. So by deluding you into believing that you're your straw man, or that you must represent your straw man under Admiralty law, the powers that be have an effective means of control over you, plus an additional means of conning money out of you in the form of fines. This is particularly devious because once the straw man has been birthed, it is alleged that a bond is traded on the stock market under that name, which is estimated to be worth millions by the time an individual reaches late middle age. So what I'm saying is that a bond is traded on the stock market for every straw man birthed. My understanding is that the trading of this bond and its subsequent revenue was originally intended to fund the lifestyle of the living man and woman, meaning that such things as energy bills and taxes were already taken care of. But that no longer seems to be the case, since few seems to even be aware of their bond, let alone its purpose. This is fraud. So now you have an idea of the level of fraud that's being perpetrated by the corporation government through the straw man fiction, and also a background and some context to the various ways we might be able to use notices of conditional acceptance. And I'm going to follow up with some examples in the next few slides. I just want to point out that this strategy is not a reason to deliberately get yourself into debt and then try to wriggle out of it. Using a notice of conditional acceptance, an NCA, would negate the purpose of common law and put you in dishonour, and also put the person loaning you the money at a loss. And remember, under common law, we do no harm or cause any loss or injury. Now, I realise that maybe some of you will be most interested in finding out how to release your strawman bond, and I'm not going to take that forward on this video because, to be honest, I've not looked into it. My purpose has always been to look at ways to support people and support myself through this pandemic. But I do suggest you research it yourself through the Common Law Court, and also take a look at Michael O'Benicia's website, The Benician, where he has some really useful information on banking fraud. Before we look at some examples of conditional notices of acceptance, CNAs, let's just recap on their purpose. What we're doing is writing to the claimant about their claim or their invitation, requesting that they provide evidence, accountability, liability, and if appropriate, a gesture of goodwill. We're asking them to respond to our request in a given time frame. And once we've done that, we're able to go about our business in the normal way until a response is received, or if no response is received within the given time frame, then we're still free to go about our business. It has the added advantage of us being able to advise any government enforcement officers that we're dealing directly with Parliament and don't need their support. Example 1 is from my previous video, your Get Out of Lockdown card. And this is actually my letter to the corporation government regarding their invitation to lockdown for a second time. Now, while I'm urging as many people as possible to send the letter to their MP, to the Prime Minister or to Parliament, I'm not suggesting sending the notice verbatim, rather that you read the notice carefully, pick out the parts that resonate with you, and also feel free to tweak the notice to suit your particular style. If you do decide to send in a lockdown notice of conditional acceptance, an NCA, be sure to sign with your normal signature through the phrases all rights reserved and none waived ever, and then send it by email followed up by registered post if you can. Once you've sent it, you can then go about your business normally, and you have the added advantage of being able to advise any enforcement officers that you're dealing directly with Parliament about the matter, so you don't require their support. Thank you very much. If you'd like more information on dealing with enforcement agencies once the NCA has been sent, do check out the link to my previous video, your Get Out of Lockdown card. NCAs can be adapted as a strategy to cover lots of eventualities. In example 2, I've adapted my previous version regarding the lockdown to deal with medical interventions, including dealing with testing or vaccinating minors without parental knowledge or consent. Now, if you read this NCA carefully, you'll notice it's a bit of a mix and match, and I've done that deliberately so that individuals can select the parts that are relevant to them to use, depending on the purpose for which they're using them and who they're intending to write to. I'm hoping also that this will give you a flavour of how to put together NCAs, whether it concerns writing to your employees about mask wearing at work, again requesting evidence and accountability. For instance, you might request independent documented scientific evidence about the efficacy of masks, ensuring that they don't cause hypoxia or hypercapnia in the short term or in the long term adverse effects to the immune system or lung cancer. You might want to add a paragraph about accountability, including requesting sight of their risk assessment. So that's another way that you might want to use an NCA. Example 3 is how to use an NCA to cover a fine or a fixed penalty notice, either for an issue with the current pandemic or it might be for another alleged offence under Admiralty law. So what we're doing in this example is requesting evidence of who exactly has committed the offence. Remember, Admiralty law only applies to the straw man and not to the living man, so we're putting the onus on the claimant to prove who the claim is actually against. And we're also requesting evidence that a crime has actually been committed by asking the claimant to produce a victim. Remember, without a victim, there isn't a crime. Then finally, choose for yourself how many days you want to give the claimant to respond with the required evidence, and remember to sign it off in the correct way by making sure you sign through the 2 sentences, all rights reserved and none waived ever. So just to help you to develop your NCA writing skills further and to give you a flavour of NCAs written by other folk, I've just listed some more examples for you to explore. So just to recap, I've explained what a notice of conditional acceptance is and how to use it and how to put one together. I provided a memory refresh regarding the law of the land, the law of the sea and the strawman fiction. I've touched on the strawman bond and I'm leaving it up to you to decide whether or not you want to take that further. I've put together some examples of notices of conditional acceptance that you can use for the future and you can adapt to suit any need that arises for you. And finally, bear in mind that no man nor any state nor corporation can enforce a guideline without consent, unless there is a victim who has been caused loss, harm or injury, and unless that victim can be furnished together with evidence, no crime has been committed and therefore the criminal justice system cannot get involved. If the government cannot produce documented scientific evidence that coronavirus exists, then the Coronavirus Act has been enacted fraudulently and those enforcing it are guilty of fraud or aiding and abetting fraud. Do remember to check out my list of resources in order to aid your further research. So as this video has been all about critical thinking and enabling the individual to write their own notice of conditional acceptances, here is a list of resources that you might find useful. Do find the time to check them out. I've also added, as you'll see, a link to the YouTube video of Sasha Stoner interviewing Bibi Bacchus about the strawman and the strawman fraud, so you can check that out further. It just remains for me to say thank you for watching and wish you all the best for the future.